Friends, you can have a seat, and we are so honored that you are here today. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us. And Sweet Tea, you snuck in today. Great to have you here. I see you over there. Pastor Reese's mom is in the house, which is always a big deal. Thank you all for being here. And my name is Mark. If I have not met you yet, do not leave today without saying hi. I would love to meet you. I get the honor to be the lead pastor here at this amazing church plant in Mableton. 6 years old. So walking and running and learning about tricycles and some other things of that season of life as a church in many different ways. So we're so thankful that you are here. I do have a question for all of you in the room today. How many of you feel a little tired when it comes to parenting or when it comes to your role as a son or a daughter? Anybody in the room today a little tired? We have some teens raising their hands, which is a little bit weird this morning. But we love you guys. We're glad you're here today. Chris and Vivian, we love your boys. Friends, it is exhausting. You know, as a parent of 3 little girls, it's a gift. Most times it's a gift in life. I love our daughters. This Friday and Saturday, we just want to invite you. This is the last push to come to our Family Teams Weekend right here, hosted at our church Friday night and Saturday. We just want to give you practical tools, biblically based tools on how to navigate the waters of parenting, grandparenting, or just your role as a son or a daughter. And how do you navigate those waters? And so this Friday and Saturday, they'll be covering the concept of vehicles and values. So our values as Christians stem out of our biblical worldview. That's how we live out our values. Well, the vehicle is the driving force for those values. And this weekend, they're going to give you the vehicle to launch those values, to give you some rhythms to focus on and some ideas and the headship of the Father, different things. And single people, you have your own curriculum that they will give to you, or ideas to help you in your place where you are in life. So Wednesday is the last day for registration. We still have room. We'd love to have you join us if you can take time. And all meals are accounted for as well this Friday night and into Saturday. If you want to know the schedule, look at the welcome desk on your way out. If you want to see if it lines up. If you can only make a little bit, that's fine too. We want to make sure that you are here with us so we can grow together for that weekend. Friends, it is very clear that the family is under attack. If you've read the news for more than 8 seconds, it's pretty clear that the enemy hates the concept of a marriage, hates the concept of what God has designed for marriage, hates the concept of gender, hates the concept of your role and your family. And so in this attack, we would just love to come back and counter that with biblical-based principles to launch forward as a church to be healthy. And so please come this weekend if you want to join us. So we're in a series called The Meekest of the Meek. It's kind of ironic in some ways. It's almost like if we have this title, like who's the most humble person in the room? Like it's kind of awkward to put your hand up, right? But the meekest of the meek, and meek is a word we don't use very often, but as I follow the life of Jesus, the more I read from the Bible, Jesus was very meek. So there's a lot of similarities with being humble, but to be meek specifically, it's those who endure in suffering. So we're going to read about a very difficult passage today. It's very dark, it's very sad. It's hard to read. There are many movies made about this, and they all try to give you an image of what was going on with Jesus as he suffered. But Jesus was very meek in his suffering. And I know there are people in the room today, maybe some friends watching online, who are going through suffering right now. And you feel very alone in your suffering. You feel like no one gets you in the thoughts that you're having and the mental torment that you have, or maybe it's physical suffering. Maybe the doctor gave you some news that you didn't want to hear this year. And so in that suffering, how can we be a people who are meek in that suffering, enduring during suffering? Yes, praying for healing, but also enduring and being humble in those moments when we're suffering. And Jesus lives this out in a perfect way. We'll talk about that here this morning. And last week, he talked about the humiliation of Jesus as the Roman soldiers and others were making fun of him and mocking him. So it wasn't just physical abuse, it was more emotional abuse. And these Romans were so excited to vent and to unleash their frustration on a Jew because they were so just sick and tired of this cultural rub going on in the community. And Passover feast was happening, and Jews had all these traditions. And so they're unleashing their fury on this one guy from Nazareth. His name is Jesus. And that's where we were last week. And so really, friends, this is an image of total fatigue as I read this story today. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the movie The Passion of the Christ. It's the only movie I ever went to a movie theater to see by myself because I felt like I just needed to go by myself. I wasn't the only one in the movie theater. It was shoulder to shoulder packed way back in the day when that movie came out. But it's just so personal to me to see this movie that was done, and how did they get the imagery? Did the imagery line up with what we see in the Bible? Did it match? And it was just so gory. It was almost distracting because it was so gory. But Mel Gibson and company, they were trying so hard to give us an image of what really happened. Because we grow up in Sunday school, we see crosses, and we heard about the crown of thorns, but we don't really have the graphic imagery that was really happening when Jesus was suffering. And so this week we carry on going past the humiliation, even though it does continue. But Jesus is now in the final push of his race on earth. And friends, I want you to think about a time in your life when you were absolutely exhausted, out of breath. Maybe for some of you it was a long time ago. But many years ago, I was excited in long-distance training and running, and I loved it. Fell in love. It was a great outlet for me. It was a way to confess stuff in my life and to pray and talk to him and devote workouts to him. And so my goal was to qualify for the Boston Marathon. And so that was my number one goal. So I had this one chance at this race coming up in Oregon, and my training buddy, we went to run the race together. He was much faster than me, so he went in front of me. So 26.2 miles of pain and suffering, probably what you're thinking. For me, it was a joyful thing, but training was horrible, injuries on and off. But that morning, I just put peanut butter all over that Cliff Bar, and I said, Jesus, guide me through. Let's go. And I remember the gun went off, and there are thousands of people in this race. And so that day, by the grace of God, we were able, both of us, to qualify the time we needed for the Boston Marathon. I remember crossing the line, and it was a moment you cannot describe, really, and I'm not going to try this morning. But that moment of complete exhaustion, fatigue, but just so much satisfaction with all my family there. My wife's large stomach was there meeting us at the end. She was pregnant, no emails. She was pregnant. Let me explain why it was big. Wow, I just went in a weird direction. But I still see all these things, and it was so great in the moment to go into the recovery at Hayward Field and Tracktown in Oregon where they do the Olympic trials. And it was such a great feeling. But I went back, and the first question I got when I went back to the office the next day was, Mark, did you win the race? Did I win? Well, no, there were Kenyans and Ethiopians. Of course I didn't win, right? We didn't have a chance. It's not a question you ask if you've ever done a marathon. You're not usually going to win. You're going against yourself. You're going against the clock. In these long-distance races, that's usually how it is. But someone else even asked after that, well, did you win? And I was like, well, no, I didn't win, but it's going for a time goal. There are thousands of people, But so often we celebrate, I think rightfully so, is the winner. The person who busts through that tape, that banner. You've all seen it before, and no matter how tired they are, even in a marathon, it's fun to watch. There's just this burst that something happens in their shoulders, in the tendons to the biceps and beyond, where in that moment, the arms go like this as they go through the tape. And the tape usually breaks at that moment. And we celebrate it because that's the winner. And it's fun to see the winner. So this morning, we're talking about exhaustion. We're talking about looking at a scenario in the Bible where someone, specifically Jesus, is absolutely spent in every way. Yes, physically, but in the cosmos in a whole other way, supernaturally. So he's so fatigued. But think about this morning as we go on. Think about that imagery of running the race. So now, in the story found in the book of Mark, we go into the story of the crucifixion. Mark chapter 15. It says this in verse 21. So now Jesus is moving forward, getting ready to head towards the place where they will crucify him. Verse 21 says this, and they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. So we see from other accounts that Jesus was packing his cross. He was carrying it, and he was doing the work to get ready for his own crucifixion. But a lot of historians think that the cross weighed somewhere around maybe 300 pounds of wood. So if you've ever carried a railroad tie before, I used to do landscaping with railroad ties, those things are massive. They're so heavy. So imagine 300 pounds. He's already been beaten. He's been made fun of. And remember, he's fully man, fully God. So he's still experiencing the pain that we experience. And so 300 pounds trying to move this, and they realize he can't do it. But they have an agenda. They're trying to go from A to B to get him over there. And so they recruit someone. And so they call in this man, Simon of Cyrene, to come in. Because they wanted Jesus alive for the crucifixion. They wanted him to make it to the hill. They wanted this public viewing of this guy to set the tone to the others. They wanted him to see him. They wanted him to die on the road on the way there. They wanted him to go there and to be there and to be alive. This is an advertisement that would be great for Rome to have him up there, suffering. Welcome to the morbid thoughts of the Romans. They were pros at executing. This is what they lived. This is what they breathed. This is what they wanted to do. They were really good at it, and that was execution. And so Jesus couldn't carry it. So the Romans didn't want to carry it. They didn't want to select someone that people knew. They didn't want to have a riot if they had some other Jew carry it. So they found a guy they didn't really recognize, a foreigner. I'm assuming he looked ripped. They said, hey, you, buddy, why don't you come in and why don't you take this cross? And why don't you help? And so now, this is the cool thing, is Rufus was well known. So Rufus, he's the son of Simon. Rufus was well known. In the book of Romans, chapter 16, Rufus is mentioned. And so Rufus is mentioned in chapter 16 and verse 13. And so we can see that Simon came to know what it meant to take up one's cross. So we think that he became a believer. He's mentioned in other accounts. And so what an interesting moment to see Simon in this moment, the one packing this cross, not maybe knowing what he's doing, but to think he is the one that took on this wood cross on his own shoulder, the one that bared the cross. And we read these passages about take your cross upon us, take our burdens upon us, and he actually lived this out. But as I read this, I kept thinking, where's the other Simon? Peter, where are you? So often we look at them, these disciples, and we're like, they're so flaky. And sometimes in my life, I'm thinking, well, where am I in a certain moment? I could have said this with that coworker or said this on the flight, and I didn't. Where's the other Simon? But what a message for us that God will accomplish his will, even when we're not willing. He will find someone else to get his work accomplished. And so Simon steps up, and he's bearing this cross. Verse 22, and they brought him, this is the key word, brought. They brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Friends, we have a change in the wording here. Back in verse 20, it says this. They talk about mocking him, and it says they led him out to crucify him. So they led him, and now they are bringing him. They had to bring him out. So they brought him. So you can see just in the words here, Jesus is failing already. He is suffering. Fatigue is all over his body. And so now they're bringing him there. And so this extreme fatigue is setting in. The course before him is very grueling, and he knew what he was in for. In verse 23, they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. He refused any drug to numb his pain. He wanted to receive this head on. He chose to face the cross with a clear mind. It's interesting here, friends. I'm sure you can think about where we've seen myrrh in another place in the Bible. It's talked about in other passages in the Bible. Now think about, just imagine Mary, and this is a Markism this morning, this is not in the Bible, but imagine the mother of Jesus. As he's offered myrrh, it's had this thing with medicinal purposes, but also is used as embalming fluid. Imagine her, if she's nearby, if she's listening and watching what Jesus was thinking in this moment, to rewind all the way back when he was maybe 2 years old. Those three strangers that showed up with gifts for him. Do you remember those guys? The three wise men? And the gifts that they brought him gold. The significance of this is a king ready for royalty. They brought him frankincense, this idea of a good scent to smell that the priests would use. So there's this priestly side of Jesus. And the last one was myrrh. Now, friends, in a baby registry, you're not going to find at the top of the list embalming fluid. It's just not something we do. But in this case, it was weird for Mary and Joseph to receive this. But this set the tone that they knew what was going to happen to their son. And so Jesus now is moving on from gold, kingship, moving on from frankincense. This idea of the priest is still there. But now we have this third category that the wise men knew about. And now enters in myrrh. And Jesus doesn't take it. At this point, later on in the story, it does come up. So he refuses this. He refuses this to be numbed. He wants to take this head on. So was this out of his love for suffering? No, Jesus doesn't love suffering. He doesn't want you to suffer, right? This world, things will happen because he gives us free will, and he doesn't intervene, because if he would, that would be taking away free will. He allows things to happen. But this, friends, is done because he simply had a love for souls. He has a love for your soul that will never be matched on this planet. He loves you so much. So he allowed himself to suffer. And look where it goes from here in verse 24. And this is so summarized so quick from Mark. It's so quick. And they crucified him. And they divided his garments and these other things. Mark, where's the explanation? I think he knew with the audience that he was writing, crucifixion was not a mystery to them. They knew how gross it was. They knew what that meant. It was a very public thing that was done where people could walk by. There were scenes of people that would show up to watch these things, witnesses that would be there. So he simply just says, they crucified him. And they did all these other things, divided his garments, casting lots, deciding who gets what. So friends, other accounts, we get an image of what crucifixion is. So this morning, I just want to read for you what really happens in a crucifixion. This is what happens in a crucifixion, the Roman crucifixion specifically. The victim's back was first torn open by the scourging. Then the clotting blood was ripped open again when the clothes were torn off the victim. When he was thrown to the ground to fix his hands on the crossbeam, the wounds were torn open again and contaminated with dirt. Then as he hung on the cross, each breath made the painful wounds on the back scrape against the rough wood on the upright beam. Insects would be attracted to this, and scavenger birds most likely would show up and be attracted to what is going on. So maybe the bugs in the post were ready for their next munch of their meal. So friends, there is so much physically that is going on with the crucifixion of Jesus. It's disgusting. It's hard to read because this is my Jesus. Most likely this is your Jesus, so it's personal. But this just gives us an insight because we're not used to this today. Yes, we have capital punishment. It's very quiet when it happens. Maybe there's a news story that talks about lethal injection. Different countries do different ways. But it's pretty much, for the most part, it's a very quiet and private thing here. Maybe a few witnesses can come into the room to see or be nearby, separated by the glass when there's a lethal injection. But we don't see stuff like this publicly. And I'm very thankful we don't. Very thankful. But this is so foreign to us. So friends, that is what crucifixion is. It was disgusting. It was gross. And we get our English word excruciating from the Roman word out of the cross. If you've ever been in excruciating pain before, that comes out of that concept, out of the cross. So this is the definition of excruciating pain, is all found here in the text with what Jesus was going through. Again, not just because of randomness, no, it's because of his love for you, his obedience to the Father. That's why he's doing this. And it was the third hour when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." The King of the Jews. This is a subtle insult to the Jews again. It carries on. This clash in cultures as they're mocking the Jews. And with him, this is really important, and I like this part of the story. And with him, he was not alone that day. There were other people being crucified. They crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Ah, you who will destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." But friends, it's exactly because he would not come down that we believe in him. So Jesus, thank you for staying up there. Personally, I thank you for staying up there. But he wasn't alone. These other two robbers, these two other criminals that were there, and Jesus being innocent, but he had ones who were up there. And Luke's story gives more insight on these other two characters, which is really important because there's more behind the story. Mark's kind of abrupt and just kind of moves on. There's so many other things that happen. And Luke, being a physician, he brings in a different context and different angle from what he saw. And so it says this in Luke chapter 23. I'll just read this for you. One of the criminals who were hanged rallied at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation. And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, this is Jesus speaking now, he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Friends, we get so many things from this theologically. This is so important and beautiful. Because in this moment, Jesus didn't say, okay, well, before we die, this guy believes, let's take him off the cross. We need to get a tank and a band and some photographers and do a baptism. No, he never said that. In this moment, Jesus just said, as they're dying up there, He said, today you will be with me in paradise. What a great indication of what is in store for us. And those moments when you're with your loved ones as they're fading and they're close to spending that step into stepping into eternity, it's this moment to think, okay, Jesus said this to him, so we should think the same hope for ourselves. Paradise, this guy expressed faith on the cross, dying, but he believed. Didn't have a perfect life, visibly being punished, and yet it was his faith that justified him before a holy God. And so, friends, many people ask, well, does baptism wash away my sins? Does it save us? We're a church that says no. Baptism is an outward expression of an inward motion in your heart. May 19th, get ready. Right here, the tank will be ready. And we already have some people, and there's a buzz that want to do this outward expression of what God has done in their life. It does not save you. It does not wash away your sins. But it is a beautiful expression of what Jesus did as well. And so one believed and one didn't. They had this choice up there on the cross. Powerful imagery. In verse 31, also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, he saved others. He cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe. Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. Even after all these miracles, all the prophecies from the Old Testament, all pointing one direction, that the Messiah would come and maybe Jesus looked different than what they were expecting. All this evidence, and here they're screaming that they want more. They want more proof. And friends, I'm not the only one in the room who in my life, I've just been like, Jesus, can you just show me more proof? Jesus, if you could just turn that light green within 2 seconds, I'll just be all in for you. Like, we've all been there, right? There's just something we just naturally just want a little more from it, just another sign that just shows, God, that you're real, that you're good, that you're beautiful. Just show me something else. Well, it's not a new construct. This goes all the way back. They just wanted to see more, even after all that they saw, all that they heard of. And yet today we're so similar. We still want more. But yet, friends, even with all the evidence presented to them, some choose to not believe. I've seen these debates before with atheists, those who don't believe in God, and agnostics, those who are not so sure. Maybe they're unknowing how these things work, and those who believe these debates. It's interesting how some people with so much venom will be so against God. And even after the Christian will do a great job of presenting all these different the evidence that God is real, the evidence that the Bible is real, the teleological evidence, so the design looks like there's a designer behind the design. It takes more faith to believe that there isn't. And I've even seen in some of these debates where the Christian will say, hey, if I could show you tomorrow that Christianity is true, would you become a Christian? I've seen someone say, no. I mean, he said true. So at that point, you know it is not a mental issue. It's not just gathering facts. It's a heart issue at that point. So many people don't want it to be true. Moral accountability, to know that they're not their own God, that changes everything. And so people today fight so hard like they did back then. They just want more, but maybe they don't want him to be God. They want to mock him. And look where the story goes from here. Now we enter into the official story of the death of Jesus. Verse 33, and when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. So the darkness, this shows the agony of creation, mourning over the Creator. And this is recorded in information outside of the Bible. Luke talks about too that the sun was darkened. But Phlegon, a Roman historian, I probably said his name completely wrong. I added a French twist to that for my wife. But a Roman historian, he talks about this. In the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, there was an extraordinary eclipse of the sun at the 6th hour. The day turned into dark night, so that the stars in heaven were seen, and there was an earthquake. Now, friends, we know there are eclipses. We know these things. We remember back, I think it was 2017, we had the amazing one. It was like, I lived in ground zero for that. It was crazy. Hot August day. Crickets came out. It was bizarre. It turned to night. Maybe some of you remember that. I think we have another one coming up in April, I think, so at some point too. But friends, listen to this. This is especially incredible because during a full moon, which Passover, which they're celebrating this time, it was always held at a full moon. A natural eclipse of the sun is impossible. Impossible. This is an extraordinary miracle in the heavens. So even the creation was mourning at this point. There was this shift. Again, there's a physical suffering, but there's this cosmic, supernatural suffering as well. And even the earth was mourning and shifting and changing. And then now in verse 34, at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? So Jesus knew great pain and suffering, physically and emotionally, but he never knew the separation from his Father. Friends, there's so much happening in the Trinity that we don't have time to go into today. We will never fully understand in what was happening in this moment. We look at the Godhead of all that we know of the God of the Bible, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. There is so much happening here. But in this pain, it goes beyond physical, and it's into now the supernatural. This happened because God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. That's what the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians. Perfect and sinless. He took all the sin on him, on his shoulders, all the things from past, present, and future, us included, all put on him in this moment. All the sins on Jesus, the perfect sacrifice. And now it says this, and some of the bystanders, and this, friends, the miscommunications continue, misunderstandings. And some of the bystanders hearing it said, behold, he's calling Elijah. So they misunderstood him. They heard what he was saying, and there's different languages going on there in the scene. We think that they heard what they thought they heard. Maybe he's talking about Elijah. It's just a miscommunication. And so he was not, and yet today misunderstandings continue about what Jesus is saying and what his word says to us. Still misunderstood. And so now, verse 36, and someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down. And Jesus now uttered a loud cry, and he breathed his last. So what is this loud cry? What did Jesus say at this point? Well, what he said is this, recorded in the book of John. It is finished. It is finished. John 19:30 says this, actually 28 through 30, tells us that what he said was he cried with a loud voice, it is finished, which is one word in the ancient Greek language. It's called totelestai. This means it is paid in full, is what it means. So Jesus now, after all these animal sacrifices, all the blood that had been shed, all these ways to pave the way for forgiveness of sins, all of that now comes to this very moment where we have the last perfect now sacrifice that knew no sin. In this moment, Jesus never said, to be continued. He never said, now it's on you. Now you have to do these things. He said simply, it is finished. It's this moment now in the race as he's coming to the very end. There's the tape in front of him. His arms are extended wide. He goes to the tape and he said, it is finished. Amen. So friends, I just want to do this. I just want to have a moment of silence. I want you to reflect deep down in your heart and think about, what does that mean to you this morning? That he ran the race, that he did the work. So just think here for a minute. What does it mean that it is finished? It is finished. Verse 38, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing them saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was the Son of God. So some people started to believe. But friends, this curtain, it was this curtain in the temple. It separated the holy place from the most holy place. Once a year, a priest would go in carrying the blood of the sacrifice for the sins of Israel. It separated this massive, tall curtain that was very thick that would separate the common people, so only the priest could go back there. So it's this place where he would go in to present the sacrifice. Only the priest could do this. So in this very moment, this is so significant for my friends in the room that come from a Catholic past, which many of you do. Every time we go through on-track, I love hearing your stories. It is rare we have an on-track class where we don't have someone that has gone through a Catholic past or grew up in a Catholic past. This is so important to realize that at this very moment, Jesus is the final high priest. So that curtain is torn, and so now we don't have to go to a human priest. We go straight to Jesus. So I don't have to wear a special collar. There's many reasons why we're different. That's why we don't have Jesus on the cross this morning, because the work is finished. We believe in the resurrection. We don't have to keep bringing him back. So this curtain being torn says now you have full access to the throne of God. You have full access to talk to him. You have full access for forgiveness of sins. It's all there. You can approach the Holy of Holies, the presence of God, through his Spirit that dwells in you. It is finished. You don't have to work anymore. He did it all. He did it for us. This is such a big deal. And so now it talks about those who are following him, all these ladies that followed him. He had a great following. Verse 40, there were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, the younger, and of Joseph and Salome. And while he was in Galilee, they followed him and ministered to him. And there also many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. So friends, the exhaustion of Jesus, and now he breathed his last. So it's finished. He paid the price. His blood was poured out for us, for his love for us. But friends, I want you to think about something that was very important back in the book of Exodus. When Moses got the 10 commandments, the fourth commandment is not a commandment that we are obligated to live by today. The fourth commandment is to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. Now, there's nothing wrong with pausing on a day and not doing what you usually do and reflecting on him. There's nothing wrong with that. But today, as Jesus followers, we believe that our Sabbath rest is found in Jesus. And so he is our rest. So Matthew 12:8 says, for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. So Jesus is our Sabbath rest. So the work is finished. Well, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for you who are so busy in your schedule and doing so many things? A lot of those things are great, serving in the church, playing a role in God's story. It's all great. But how can we live in this? This morning, maybe you showed up and you are exhausted in so many different ways because you're trying to earn some points with him, trying to earn your own salvation, trying to do all these different things, thinking if you just did this, God's favor would be poured out on you. Yes, we're supposed to be obedient. New Testament talks about all these things we're supposed to live by, and the Apostle Paul is correcting all these churches. So living like Christ, being obedient to his word is good, but how do we fully rest in the work that he has done? How do we pause? Now, how do we do this while we serve? So yes, God wants us to serve. And the dance of trying to serve but also resting in him is a crazy dance. It's hard to figure out. But friends, this morning, maybe some of you are absolutely tired and exhausted because you have been working so hard and you've been running in circles in many different ways relationally. Maybe you're trying to run the race on your own strength, trying to just do life on your own. Maybe this morning you're even a believer of Jesus and you still feel like in your soul you're just doing all these things and just checking off boxes and you're tired of running your own race. Well, this morning I just want to give you a chance to just publicly declare that you would love prayer, that you can find rest, a Sabbath rest in the work of Jesus. So friends, if that is you this morning, if you would just love prayer, you just want to publicly let us all know, I'm just going to ask for you to stand this morning. If you just want to do better at resting in him and the work that he's done. If that's you this morning, just stand and I'll just pray for you. If anybody in the room wants to do better and not running in circles, but focusing on the rest that we can get from Jesus and the work that he has done. I know we are all tired. The race of life and the to-do list and the agenda and relational issues and financial insecurity, all these things we do. But friends, have us be a church that rests in the work that Jesus has done. We can't gain any extra points. We can't gain our own salvation. It was all finished on the cross when his blood poured out for you and for me. So friends, let me pray for us this morning. Jesus, we are tired. But I think about what you went through, God, and it pales in comparison. What am I even talking about? That moment when I crossed the finish line, there was no tape in front of my chest, but I was tired. It is nothing for what you went through. Nothing compares to what you went through on the cross because you love us. So God, help us to be a people who are not just busy. It is so easy to be overcommitted, overworked, even in the church. So God, help us, those who are standing this morning and say, hey, we just want to do a better job of resting in you. Jesus, help those who are standing this week to rest in the work that you have done. Just to look at the blood that was shed, to look at the effort that you poured out. And so, Jesus, I invite you to run the race with them. And if there's anybody who's standing that has never placed their faith in you, like that robber that turned and said, okay, surely you are the Son of God. Surely you are the one. Yes, I have faith. When the robber turned and acknowledges to Jesus, maybe there's someone here today who wants to do that for the very first time. And they want to place their faith in you. So Spirit of the living God, get their hearts and get their souls this morning. But for those who are standing, God, give us rest, a deep rest that's supernatural, that only you provide. And Jesus, I pray this in your name. Amen. Friends, if you would like prayer for anything in life, we'll have some prayer team leaders at these crosses. They would love to pray for you this morning. Be brave to come forward. If you've never placed your faith in Christ, I'll be in the back of the room too, and I'd love to pray for you and walk through what that looks like and how you can do that this morning to receive that forgiveness that Jesus wants to pour out on you.